Okay, so what we're doing today is section 4.5. I've actually combined a couple things from different sections, but this kind of goes well together, I think. So let's get a marker. All right. So given factors, we need to be able to graph a function. Okay, and so to do this, what we do is we graph the zeros, which is the opposite of the parentheses. Okay. We've done this with quadratics. Remember when we had vertex or intercept form for quadratics? If we had something like this, x minus 2, x plus 3, we knew that this one crossed at 2, so we made a dot here because we knew it crossed there. And then this one was at negative 3. And so then we would find the midpoint, but we knew that the curve would kind of go like that. Okay, it's the same idea. We're going to find these intercepts, these x-intercepts, and graph them. Okay, so you've graphed the zeros, like I did here, the negative 3 and 2. And then you find the y-intercept, and this is all messed up. I don't know what I was doing. And you find the y-intercept by plugging in x equals 0. And then once you have that, then you know where it crosses the y-axis. Now, at this point this year, we have not learned how to graph much yet. We're going to kind of learn about the shapes and the different things later. But let's see. So right here, this one tells me it crosses at negative 2. This one tells me it crosses at 3. And this one tells me it crosses at negative 5. Okay, so I'm not going to make a super huge thing. So I need to go to negative 2, make a dot, positive 3, make a dot, and then go out to negative 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it crosses 3 times. You see how it has 3 answers? That's because it's an x cubed functions, and x cubed functions kind of look like this. They turn. Okay. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to find the y-intercept. So I'm going to do that by plugging in 0. So 0 plus 2, 0 minus 3, and 0 plus 5. So that's 2, negative 3, and 5. So that's negative 6 times 5, which is negative 30. Whoa, that's way down here. We are not going to make 30 tick marks. We're just going to say it crosses down here at negative 30. Okay? All right, so the main thing we're going to do right now is before we actually learn how to graph it with the curves, we're actually going to go to Desmos. So let me pause this. Okay, so I'm at Desmos, and I plug this in y equals. Now, I'm try and make it. You can kind of see what happens. It goes up, it goes down, and it goes up. When we do our next section on graphing, you're going to see kind of why that works. But for now, I'm allowing you to find the zeros and then follow that pattern from Desmos. So it starts low, it goes up, goes back down, goes a little bit below the 30, and then goes back up. So let's kind of graph that. So up, down, a little bit below the 30, and up. And it's definitely not drawn to scale, but right now the thing that I'm going to be focusing on is that you're able to graph finding the zeros and the y-intercept. Okay. All right. Before we go to this next part, let's go ahead and look at the first 3 examples. Oops. And I would like you to try examples 1, 2, and 3. So graph each function given the factors. I also want you to find the y-intercept. When you think you have it, go ahead and press play and we'll check it. Okay, when we look at number 1, I have my intercepts in blue and then my y-intercept in purple. I didn't have a bunch of space, so we're going to kind of draw number 1 over here. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Negative 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, and again negative 30. It's that usually doesn't happen. Okay, so hopefully you got all those points, and then you went to Desmos and you looked at the graph. And you might have to zoom out so that you could see it. And so it's the same shape. It goes up, down, goes below the 30 again, goes way below 30, and then goes back up. So up, down, below 30, back up. Okay. All right. Let's make sure you did number 2. Okay, so for number 2, you should have had the x-intercepts of -2, 4, and 4. This 4 out front doesn't really do anything. It's going to flip the thing upside down like we've learned transformation rules, and it's going to stretch it. And then we plug in 0 and we get -128. That is really big. Now the question is, what happens here when you have the same answer twice? And let's look at the graph. And so let's look at Desmos. We have our points graphed. We know it crosses at -2, +4, and then -128. And so let's look at Desmos. And then there's the function. So then when I zoom out, it still kind of does that. It goes down, up, down, but you'll notice it turns on this point at +4. So we need to make sure our graph does that. It goes, wait, let's look at that again. Does it go below the y-intercept? Nope, it looks like it turns on the y-intercept also. Okay, so it doesn't go below there. All right, so it goes down, it turns, it goes up, and then it bounces back off of that. Okay. All right, same thing. Number 3, find your x-intercept, your y-intercept, and then graph it. Press play when you're ready. Okay, so in the parentheses, we had 2, -1, 3. And then this is the one that's different because it's just x by itself. Remember, when there's not a plus or minus, it's just x equals 0. And so it crosses at 2, -1, 3, and 0. And then here, when I plug in zeros here, because there's something without a plus or minus, it crosses at 0. So my y-intercept is also 0. So we haven't done one with 4 dots yet. So let's look at Desmos to see what happens. Oh, and it makes a W. Okay. And if you notice down here, they show up kind of at the same height. So we're going to try and make our curves show up at about the same height. And so let's go ahead and draw that. So down, up, down, and make it kind of curve at the same height. And that's it. We're definitely going to get into more technical things of how we find these different curves and how we know when it goes up versus goes down. But for right now, the focus of this lesson is knowing how to find the intercepts, the x-intercept and the y-intercept, and then using Desmos to actually finish that curve. Okay. All right, let's go back up to the next thing. So the next thing that we talk about is called multiplicity. And we actually had a problem with multiplicity and we didn't talk about it, but that's okay. All right, multiplicity is a polynomial function, has multiplicity when it has duplicate factors. Do you remember which one had the same factor twice? Let's go back down here and look. This one right here. You see how it has the same factor twice? That's called multiplicity. Okay? All right, so let's go see what happens with multiplicity. And let's actually look at our graph while we're here. At 4, that's our multiplicity. Look what happened. It didn't actually go through the graph. It kind of hit the graph and bounced back off the graph. It didn't actually go through the x-axis. It just went and touched it. So when you have multiplicity, especially this one, which is multiplicity of 2, let's do a different, we've used all those colors. Let's use orange. Multiplicity of 2. It's going to go up and bounce off the axis. Okay, so let's apply that to here. So my zeros are x equals 3, x equals 2. And you see how these two are exactly the same? I don't need to write it twice, right? Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do multiplicity of 2. And what that tells me is that when I get to 2, it's going to bounce off the 2. It's not actually going to go through the 2. Okay, so let's graph these points again. 1, 2, 3, and 2. I don't need anything over here, so that's why I'm going to do my y-intercept. So 0, -3, 0, -2, 0, -2. So negative 3 times negative 2 times negative 2. Well, 3 times 2 is 6, times 2 is 12, but because there's 3 negatives, it should be negative 12. So I'm going to go down here and make negative 12. Okay, so let's go look at it in Desmos. Okay, so it comes up way down here, and then it bounces off, it hits 2, bounces off, curves a little, and goes up. So we can draw that. So it's going to come up from here, hits 2, bounces off, curves a little, and comes up. It's kind of ugly. Not work out too good. Bounces off a little bit. There we go. Okay. All right, let's look at this next one. So my intercepts, remember whenever I have nothing with a plus or minus, that's 0, -5, and then -1. Now, you see here, over on the left, we wrote it out twice. This one, they didn't write it out twice. They just wrote that little squared. That squared makes it multiplicity of 2. Okay? And then let's do our next thing. Let's find our y-intercept. So negative 0, 0 plus 5, 0 plus 1 squared. And we don't really have to do anything because remember, whenever you have a 0 out front, it's going to make everything 0. So this is 0. So we know it's going to cross on 0. So my graph, I got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -1. And at -1, it's going to bounce off. So let's go look at Desmos to make sure we understand whether it's going up, down, what are the directions, but we know it's going to bounce off at -1. Okay, so see this one. Oh, look at what I did. You guys see? It shouldn't be at... Erase. Don't you erase? I'll just delete it. Oh, deleted the wrong thing. Okay, so it's actually supposed to be at -5. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. My bad. Okay, so now let's look. It goes up, it bounces off the 2, goes up some more, and then crosses through 0. Okay, so goes up, bounces off the -1. I think I said 2, goes up, and goes back down. Okay? So that's what multiplicity does. It just lets you know that if something has multiple factors, it's going to bounce off of it. Okay? All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to find the zeros and factors from a graphing calculator, which is pretty nice because all we have to do, oops, let's see, why aren't you working? There we go. You're going to plug each function into y equals. You're allowed to use a graphing calculator or Desmos. I really like Desmos because you can see it clearer. Find the 0, and that's where the graph intersects the x-axis. Plug those zeros into parentheses. Remember to do the opposite. So what we're doing now is we're just taking the function and graphing it in Desmos and seeing what it looks like. Okay? Okay, so here's my function. It crosses at -2, -2, 1, and 3. Okay, so write that down. -2, 1, and 3. And so now we're just going to graph that. -2, 1, and 3. The other thing we have been doing is we've been finding the y-intercept. So let's see. Y-intercept is at 6, so let's actually graph that. It's better if we be consistent. So y is 6. And then let's look at it one more time. It starts from down, it goes up above the 6, goes down, and curves and come back up. Okay, so goes up above the 6 a little bit, curves, and come back down. And then back up. Okay, so we found the zeros from the graphing. Now, if it says something like write in factors, write in factored form, that's when you do this step. If it says find the zeros, you're going to write in factor form. So it'll be y is equal to, Well, the first 0 was -2, so that becomes x plus 2. The second 0 was 1, so that becomes x minus 1. And then the third one was a positive 3, so that becomes x minus 3. So you only do that if it says find in factored form. Okay, so let's go down and look at the examples. And I know this is a lot of notes. It's kind of a big section, but we're almost done. Okay, so I'd like you to try 6 and 7 by plugging them in the calculator and then finding the zeros and graphing it. Okay, so here's what you have for number 6. It crosses at -2, -1, and 3. Okay, so -2, -1, and 3. Did I do that right? Yep. And then the y-intercept, let's see, is right here at, oh, it's not exact, oh yeah, -6. Okay. And then y equals -6. So let's draw a little graph. That did not give you much space, and I apologize for that. Is that a -2? It's supposed to be a -2. I don't know what I did. I forgot the negative. And it's supposed to be a -1. I was not doing well there. Okay, so crosses at 3, -1, -2, all the way down here at -6. And then let's do the shape. And actually, we don't even need to do the shape. And look at what it says. It just says find the zeros. I was doing too much. So these are your answers. There we go. Don't need the other stuff. See if I can erase it. Medium eraser. Ooh, yeah, look at that. So we just had to find the zeros. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Go back to my screen. I had it already there. I'm going to turn that one off and turn this one on. This one crosses at, what is that, -1? And this one's 2. But look at what happens. It bounces off of that. So that has multiplicity. So we're going to say x is, what was that number again? -1. And then x is 2. But then you write multiplicity 2 so that we know that answer is there twice. Okay? Any questions on the graphing part? Hopefully you kind of understand it. If you're not sure, ask in class or send me a message and I can explain it again. Let's look at the last final thing. Holy cow, long notes. Okay, so solving by factoring. For solving by factoring, we've done a ton of factoring. You've gotten pretty good at factoring. You have to move everything over so it equals 0, and then you're going to factor the polynomial completely. And then you set each factor to 0, and then you solve. Okay, so I need to move this one over, and I need to put it in the correct spot. So 2x to the 4th plus 4x to the 3rd plus 8x squared minus 16x. Now you always want to look for a GCF, and right now you could see I could take out a 2x out of each of these things. And when I take a 2x out, I'm left with x to the 3rd plus 2x squared plus 4x minus 8. Now, you notice that this is a 4-term polynomial. So I'm going to take that and do my grouping method. So I'm going to do that up here. We'll come back to the 2x later. So x cubed plus 2x squared plus 4x minus 8. And remember, we group it. And so what can I take out of these two? And the thing I could take out of these two is an x squared. So I'm left with x squared with x plus 2. And then I group the next one. And the thing I could take out of these two is 4. So because it's a plus, I put a plus here, 4. X minus 2. What happened here? So the reason I'm saying what happened here is because my parentheses are different. So that means there's got to be a mistake somewhere. And I found my mistake, and you were probably yelling at me on the computer earlier but couldn't hear me. My mistake is right here. When I move this over, it should have been a negative. So what happens is I need to change this to a negative and change this to a negative. So I'm going to erase this puppy. If I can do that, yeah, erase it. And now instead of taking out a positive 4, I took out a negative 4. which makes it a plus 2. Now my parentheses are the same. And so now I have the parentheses, which is x plus 2. And then I have this one here, the outside things, which is x squared minus 4. Do you guys recognize what x squared minus 4 is? That's right, we could factor that again. And so I'm running out of space, but so it's going to be x plus 2. And then this becomes x plus 2, x minus 2. And then lastly, we got to bring over our 2x. So look at all those factors. So if I write this prettier, it'll be 2x. And then this, you see how it's the same thing twice? I don't want to write it twice. I'm just going to write a little squared. And then x minus 2. So now when I write my zeros, this one is just 0. This one is negative 2. I'm going to write multiplicity 2. And this one is positive 2. There you go. So we used all our factors and we set them to 0, and then we're able to find our answers. Okay, so let's go down and look at the last two. And again, this is a lot of notes. Usually in class we do this at 2 or 3 days, so it's not so overwhelming. So this one is set up in 3. The first thing you always do, remember, is look for a GCF. And so your GCF is what? That's right, x. So it becomes x squared plus 5x minus 6. And remember, for trinomials, this is when we do our listing of the last number. And for this one, we're going to subtract to give us 5. And the numbers that subtract to give us 5 are 1 and 6. So x with a 1, x with a 6. The only way I can get a positive 5 if it's a positive 6 and a negative 1. And now we just do our zeros. 0, 1, negative 6. Okay, I'd like you to try number 9 on your own. It's very similar to the example we did ahead of time. Once you think that you have it, go ahead and press play and check your work. The first thing you should have done was move things over. Look, I made sure I had the right signs. And then I group, and I could take out an x squared, so I get x plus 1. And then for this next one, I group, and I could take out a negative 4, and I get x plus 1. And so I get that x squared minus 4 again. If you remember when we did factoring, I said you were going to get that a lot, and we're going to get difference of squares a lot. So it becomes x plus 2, x minus 2, and x plus 1. And again, the x plus 2 and the x minus 2 came from this right here. Okay, so now we just got to write our answers. Negative 2, ooh, that's ugly. Negative 2, positive 2, negative 1. And that's it. Lots of information here. Go back and watch the specific sections if you have questions on it. But remember, for graphing, we're looking for where it crosses the x-axis mainly, and then we use Desmos to help us figure out curves. For factoring, we factor using all the processes we've learned in the past, and then we do the opposite to find out what their answer is.